Hello again, class. I hope you're still doing well. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about the compare and contrast strategy. So let's jump right into it. All right. I'm just going to read you the chapter, and then we'll practice making a thesis and topic sentences for comparison and contrast. The purpose of comparison and contrast in writing. Comparison in writing discusses elements that are similar, while contrast in writing discusses elements that are different. The compare and contrast essay then analyzes two subjects by examining them closely and comparing them, contrasting them, or both. The key to a good compare and contrast essay is to choose two or more subjects that connect in a meaningful way. For example, you wouldn't really want to do like puppies and socket wrenches. Those are two very different things and they don't really compare. The purpose of conducting the comparison or contrast is not to state the obvious, but rather to illuminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities. For example, if you wanted to focus on contrasting two subjects, you would not pick apples and oranges. Rather, you might choose to compare and contrast two different types of oranges or two different types of apples to highlight these subtle differences. Subtlety is very important, and specificity also. For example, Red Delicious apples are sweet, while Granny Smiths are tart and acidic. Drawing distinctions between elements in a similar category will increase the audience's understanding of that category, which is the purpose of the compare and contrast essay. Similarly, to focus on comparison, choose two subjects that seem at first to be unrelated. For a comparison essay, you would likely not choose two apples or two oranges because they share so many of the same properties already. Rather, you might try to compare how apples and oranges are quite similar. The more divergent the two subjects initially seem, the more interesting a comparison essay will be. All right, the structure of a comparison and contrast essay. The compare and contrast essay starts with a thesis that clearly states the two subjects are to be compared, contrasted, or both, and the reason for doing so. The thesis could lean more towards comparing, contrasting, or both. You can pick one or the other, or you can do both of them. Remember, the point of comparing and contrasting is to provide useful knowledge to the reader. Take the following thesis as an example that leans more towards contrasting. Organic vegetables may cost more than those that are conventionally grown, but when put to the test, they are definitely worth every extra penny. Here the thesis sets up the two subjects to be compared and contrasted, organic versus conventional vegetables, and it makes a claim about the results that might prove useful to the reader. That's one way of doing it. You're going to see that I'm a big subpoints guy. I'm always going to argue for the subpoints, but I want you to understand that it's not the only way you can do it. If you don't want to list out subpoints and you want to do a thesis statement that's more like this one here, that's fine. As long as you accomplish the main idea and the goals of the thesis statement, the thesis is up to you how you structure it. You may organize compare and contrast essays in one of the following two ways. One, according to the subjects themselves, discussing one and then the other. Two, according to individual points, discussing each subject in relation to each point. See the comparison and contrast diagram on the next page, which diagrams ways to organize our organic versus conventional vegetables thesis. The organizational structure you choose depends on the nature of your topic, your purpose, and your audience. Given that compare and contrast essays analyze the relationship between two subjects, it is helpful to have some phrases on hand that will cue the reader to such analysis. See table of phrases of comparison and contrast, for example. So here is the table of phrases of comparison and contrast. One of the cool things about your textbook is it breaks down into tables the types of language you will need for the given strategies. So make sure you take a look at those tables once you've chosen a strategy so you know the kinds of transitions and the kinds of phrases and words that you need to be using to bring your essay into focus. So for comparison, you have one similarity, both, like, likewise, similarly, and in a similar fashion. For contrast, you have one difference, conversely, in contrast, unlike, while, and whereas. All of these words can be useful when trying to formulate the proper paragraph structure and use the words associated with the strategy. All right, here's a diagram organized by subject. Okay, here's the thesis, organic vegetables, conventional vegetables, and conclusion. So we have the different points that we're going to compare on. All right, so this is just a way that they've got it broken down, and you can choose really any of these ways is fine. If you're a visual person, this can be very helpful. But writing a comparison and contrast essay. First, choose whether you want to compare seemingly disparate subjects. That means very different. contrast seemingly similar subjects, or compare and contrast subjects. Once you have decided on a topic, introduce it with an engaging opening paragraph. We know the formula, it's hook, line, and sinker. Your thesis should come at the end of the introduction, and it should establish the subjects you will compare, contrast, or both, as well as state what can be learned from doing so. Be sure to make an argument in your thesis. Explain to the reader what's at stake in analyzing the relationship between your stated subjects. That is an option. You can also do the subpoint option if you'd like. The body of the essay can be organized in one of two ways, by subtracting or by individual points. The organizing strategy that you will choose will depend on, as always, your audience and your purpose. You may also consider your particular approach to the subject as well as the nature of the subjects themselves. Some subjects might better lend themselves to one structure or the other. Make sure to use comparison and contrast phrases to cue the reader in the ways in which you are analyzing the relationship between the subjects. After you finish analyzing the subjects, write a conclusion that it says summarizes the main points. Please don't do that. Professorial preference. Try to say that 20 times fast. I don't like it when you repeat everything you've already written. Here we are, we're reading the textbook and it's telling you to do that, and I'm telling you not to. Why? Because I don't want to read the same thing again. I don't see why we need to do that. There's so much more you can do in the conclusion than just repeat yourself, but it's a knee-jerk thing that lots of people do. Okay, so here is again the sample. We have a sample outline, breaking down the thesis, going through everything that they're going to do. I believe this is Batman. I guess it's the different Batmans throughout time, but what's remained the same or whatever. So this is a pretty useful thing, right? We have this outline that you can take a look at, and then of course they flesh the outline into an actual essay. And here we go. Now, one thing I do notice about this essay is that they're not using Times New Roman, but that's okay. Make sure you do for the purpose of your essay. And you can just check out this sample essay if you want about Batman. It is available for you. And so that pretty much covers what we have in the textbook. So if you want to read that sample essay, I'm not going to read it to you. It would take a while. If you want to read it on your own, you know it's in the chapter, and you can model your essay after it in order to get a good grade. Okay, although make sure you don't plagiarize. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to share the Word document, and we are going to practice. Give me 1 second. We are going to practice frogs and toads. We're going to do contrast frogs and toads. You could do both. We're going to stick with contrast today, okay? Just for the purpose, because frogs and toads are one of those ones with, like, they're so similar that sometimes people think that they're completely the same. A lot of times people don't know that there's a huge difference between frogs and toads. They look at the frog and they look at the toad and they see essentially the same animal, and they're not exactly wrong, right? But they're actually quite different. So the first thing we need is a thesis about comparing and contrasting frogs and toads. So while frogs and toads are so similar that they are often mistaken for one another, they actually differ along many key areas, including habitat. What's another difference? Habitat, skin type, and let's see. And also have some variations in diet. Okay. While frogs and toads are so similar that they are often mistaken for one another, they actually differ along many key areas, including habitat, skin type, and diet. Well, actually, let's fix that. I screwed that up. Sorry. And dietary variations. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. That is the correct grammar. All right. They actually differ along many key areas, including habitat, skin type, and dietary variations. Okay, let's do it. Topic sentence 1. All right, so that's going to be the habitat. Despite their similar appearance, frogs and toads differ greatly regarding the amount of time they spend on land, with toads being far more terrestrial than frogs. All right, so frogs, because of I'm not a naturalist, but I do love nature. Because of the skin that frogs have, being very slimy and that sort of thing, they can't really leave the water for very long. They can leave the water, but they have a certain amount of time before they start to dry out and things get icky for them. Whereas toads, they really don't sweat it. They do approach the water, especially for the purpose of breeding and like laying eggs and stuff. But for most of the toad's life, it will spend its life on land. So that's very different. That's one important thing. Topic sentence 2. All right, so let's go up to our subpoint. Skin type, okay. One of the most noticeable differences between these two amphibians is that the skin of toads is much more rough than that of frogs. And is a good deal more durable also. Okay, so it's not perfect because there's some passive voice and stuff, and there's always a way to improve the writing, but it works as a topic sentence. One of the most noticeable differences between these two amphibians is that the skin of toads is much more rough than that of frogs, and it is a good deal more durable also. Okay, good. Now that entire paragraph would be about the skin differences in toads and frogs, and what the advantages are, and how you can tell them apart, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, final topic sentence. It says rougher. Yeah, that's good. Skin of toads is much rougher than that of frogs. Good, we'll take that. Okay. Topic sentence 3. Sometimes it's good to trust the computer. But sometimes they give you good advice, and then sometimes they just mess you up. Okay, and the last is the dietary variations. Okay, while frogs and toads share some dietary overlay, toads eat far fewer aquatic organisms than frogs do. Okay, so frogs might eat things like fish and maybe a crawdad. I don't know. It depends on what the frog is after. It depends on what type of frog it is. So that will do. I mean, it's not super long. While frogs and toads share some dietary overlay, toads eat far fewer aquatic organisms than frogs do. I think that's perfect. And we can go in and talk about the different types of aquatic organisms that a frog is going to have more readily available access to that a toad will not, and the types of things that maybe a toad would eat that a frog will not. We could even amend that topic sentence to say, whereas toads have a wider array of land-borne animals at their disposal. Okay, so while frogs and toads share some dietary overlay, toads eat far fewer aquatic organisms than frogs do, whereas toads have a wider array of land-borne animals at their disposal. Okay, cool. So those are 3 topic sentences. Then what do we do, folks? Well, we know that we go back up to the thesis and we do hook, line, and sinker. So we start with a good attention getter. What's a good attention getter for frogs? Man, if I've learned anything, it's that frogs are crazy animals, and toads too. And they're all, amphibians are just really cool, and they do a lot of really cool stuff. So you could talk about how cool they are as animals and like describe them vividly. I know that one of my favorite sounds is to go by a swamp at night and to hear the toads and the frogs, well, the frogs mainly making their noises and stuff. The chorus of frogs at night can be very overwhelming. It's a powerful noise to hear a swamp with all of the little frogs making all of the noise at the same time, and how they kind of have like almost like a chorus, like they're singing together. That's a very powerful image. You could use that as a hook, right? Paint that picture for someone, get them invested. There's lots of different ways you can hook your reader. Then you need context for frogs and toads. What's the context that you need to know? Well, you need to know they're both amphibians. You need to know they're both distributed widely over the world. They have kind of a similar diet and a similar, I mean, that's one of the topics in this. But really, any contextual information that you need to know about frogs and toads, maybe the fact that they make good pets for people and you can choose between them based on your preference, whatever you want to say. But the context, now I don't need a history of their evolution, like too much context. You just need enough context to let the reader know what is up, and then you lead into the thesis statement. Then you take each of these topic sentences and you flesh out the supporting details in the body paragraphs, talk about it in greater specificity, focus on the minute details and the subtle differences between the two, and really paint the picture between frogs and toads for your reader. After that, we get to the conclusion, and remember, my personal rule for the conclusion is that you do not repeat yourself, but rather that you achieve the tone of closure and address any open-ended stuff that you might not have been able to deal with in the structural body of the essay itself. So that will conclude our lecture today on compare and contrast. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions for me, you know how to find me. Have a lovely afternoon, weekend, night, morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are.